Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This can be the smartest move Republicans can make in 2028 going forward. That's if they nominate Glenn Youngkin in 2028 as their nominee if he decides to end up running. Now, what a lot of people are not talking about is Glenn Youngkin. And I think he can definitely be a candidate in 2028 for the Republicans. Obviously, he's the current governor of the state of Virginia, which always votes Democrat, but he's obviously a Republican governor in that blue state, and voted for Harris by 5 points. She overestimated polls, so it's not a red state whatsoever. In fact, it's actually pretty much a blue state. And the reason why I have him going up against Bernie Sanders in this prediction specifically, which we're going to predict the map very shortly, is because I give him almost the same chance of winning the nomination as if Bernie Sanders were to win the Democratic nomination. So that's why I match up Glenn Youngkin with Bernie Sanders, because I believe they have similar chances of winning their respective party's nominee. So I would give them this around the same odds is what I'm trying to say. So if Glenn Youngkin ends up winning the nomination in 2028 for the Republicans, then I would say Bernie Sanders has equal chances, or equivalent to Glenn Youngkin. So if you know what I'm saying. Before we get started with the map, make sure you guys are subscribed, click the bell so you don't miss my content. Press the like button, share this video if you're interested. Don't forget we have memberships, so you can find the links to that in the description section. So I believe that Glenn Youngkin is not being talked about a lot, and I think he will be very unbeatable. He's very unbeatable. He is a Republican governor in a Democratic state. I know people like to say, "Oh, it's a competitive battleground swing state. Virginia's a swing state." Well, it's when has it voted Republican in the general election since like what George W. Bush or something, and it hasn't in a very, very long time, more than a couple of decades. So it's still a blue state. And I know this is a general election, not a governor's race, so it's not like he's gonna be this unstoppable candidate. No, that's not the case, and which is why I believe he can. If he does end up being the nominee, he could actually lose Virginia, despite being the governor here. He can actually lose Virginia on the general election because, like I just stated, it's not a governor's race. This is a general election. So even though it's his own home state, he's the governor of the state. On the general election, Glenn Youngkin, there's a possibility he still loses Virginia, but I think he will be the slight winner, which is where we're going to start this prediction. Virginia, tilt margin for Glenn Youngkin. Against Bernie Sanders, I think he wins it by under a percentage point, a tilt margin. But there, like I mentioned, there's a possibility, even though he's the governor here, he can still lose it to Bernie Sanders, in this case Bernie, in the general election. And honestly, I don't think we're that far away from a Bernie Sanders nomination in 2028. I know he's old, which is, it's crazy to say that I think he can be the nominee because of his age. Is a concern. They don't want to be, they don't want Joe Biden 2.0 to happen. But I think Bernie Sanders is a little bit more there. I think his cognitive is better than Joe Biden's clearly, and he's older than Joe Biden, I believe. So, with that being said, I think Bernie Sanders could make a good candidate for the Democrats in 2028. He's anti-establishment. In fact, he's not really a Democrat. I mean, he's not a liberal, but he's a socialist Democrat. Matches with that progressive stereotype. I think AOC can be his VP. They've been doing rallies together, getting up tons of people in the thousands, somewhere between 15 to 30,000 per rally, which is pretty good considering there's no election going on. Just people show up because they just like him. And if that's the case, I think he ran twice. In 2016, he should have beat Hillary Clinton. We all know what happened there. And then in 2020, he got unlucky and Joe Biden nearly beat him out. He came close 2 times, maybe 3 times the charm. That's why I think he can be the nominee in 2028. But talking aside, let's get with this prediction. This is about Glenn Youngkin and how the Republicans can make the smartest move if they choose to nominate him, if he decides to run, obviously, in 2028, which I think he could, and he should actually, because that'll just be smart if they do, if Republicans nominate him in 2024. So I do want to get New Jersey out the way, because it's no longer a solid blue state. Now you can make the case this is like an Indiana from the Obama era, where it was close just in one election, but never ever again. The reason why I say that's not the case, and it is a true battleground state moving forward in the future, is because you take a look at the elections from 2021. They almost elected a Republican governor, came within 3 points on the off-year election that year in 2021. And that's how we knew that all along that in 2024, New Jersey was going to be close. Not only that, the polls showed it was going to be close. So this is not in Indiana during the Obama era type of situation. It's just not. New Jersey, whether you like it or not, in my opinion, is going to be a battleground state. It is right now, and Harris only won it by about 6 points, and it will be in the future as well. Now, as far as Minnesota goes, I do believe that Bernie Sanders will defeat Glenn Youngkin in this state. And the main reason why for that is because Minnesota hasn't voted for a Republican in a very long time. And if it were to, I would say Glenn Youngkin probably has the best chance. But this state likes more of establishment type of candidates. They don't like the MAGA populism that Trump brings to nowadays Republican Party. But Glenn Youngkin is not necessarily MAGA. Now, it is true he campaigned with Donald Trump in Virginia to help try to get him to win the state, which did not happen. So you can say he is MAGA, but he doesn't really tie himself too much to that. He's a moderate, a centrist. That's exactly what got him elected in a blue state like Virginia, which is why I think he has the best chance of winning Minnesota. But I think Bernie Sanders is a good candidate for the Democrats, and especially considering Minnesota. So I would say lean Democrat for Bernie in the state of Minnesota. And then as far as the lean states goes for both these candidates, actually let me fill New Jersey lean Democrat for Bernie Sanders. I totally forgot to do that. I just skipped right over to Minnesota. But the lean states for Glenn Youngkin, in this case scenario, I think, actually before we get on to the lean, Arizona's going to be likely. It went to Trump by 5 points. I honestly see Glenn Youngkin expanding that coalition. Not only will he win like 90% of the MAGA base in the general election, obviously not in the primary, but in the general election, he would get majority of the MAGA base. But he would also win over some centrist Democrats because Glenn Youngkin is that type of candidate. I mean, he did it in Virginia, but obviously this is not a governor's race, but it just goes to show you that Glenn Youngkin does have the resume to be a winner. He has been a winner in the past, even when he was an underdog in Virginia's governor's race back in 2021. I believe he was expected to narrowly lose. He ended up pulling it off, surprisingly. And then Georgia, I think, will lean for Glenn Youngkin in this scenario. I think Georgia specifically, that's where Glenn Youngkin would perform very well in the southern type of states. Southeast, like North Carolina as well, will also lean for Glenn Youngkin. You take a look at Georgia, they're not really a populist type of state. Glenn Youngkin isn't really a populist. He's a centrist. He's a moderate. They don't like MAGA at all. I mean, MAGA type of candidates, because you take a look at their governor. He serves as a great example of why Georgia does not like electing MAGA candidates on the Republican Party. Glenn Youngkin is not MAGA. He's establishment, and he won by 7 points. And then when you had MAGA candidates run in 2022 like Herschel Walker, he got absolutely obliterated. So Georgia is a state that loves establishment type of Republicans. They would call them neocons, but Glenn Youngkin obviously is not a neocon. But he's a centrist, which is why it goes so well. And I think Glenn Youngkin is perfect in states like Georgia and North Carolina, which Republicans desperately need to do better in before they shift towards the left or go blue, because they are trending towards left. Georgia only went Trump by 2 points. So if Glenn Youngkin isn't a Republican nominee in 2028, I can honestly see a few Democrats actually flipping Georgia on the general election level. Call me crazy, but that's just my opinion. And then I think Nevada will lean towards Glenn Youngkin. I honestly don't see how Bernie can win this state, especially facing off against Glenn Youngkin. And keep in mind, Bernie Sanders is not, he's an independent, but he has to caucus with the Democratic Party. So he doesn't, he agrees with a lot of their issues, but there's like a good amount where he just doesn't, agree with. And he is kind of like a progressive. He's a socialist Democrat, not so much a liberal. I don't think I would call him a liberal, but Glenn Youngkin, I think, will win Nevada. It is a Republican trendy state. Trump won it by 3 points. It's shifting towards the right. I don't see any evidence that Democrats can win Nevada in 2028 unless they have a great candidate out of the blue. But I think Glenn Youngkin is the Josh Shapiro of the Republican Party. When they speak, they kind of sound the same. But I think Josh Shapiro and Glenn Youngkin, in terms of strength, are basically neck and neck. So I think Glenn Youngkin is really the Josh Shapiro of the Republican Party. That's just my opinion. And then we move on to New Hampshire before we end off this video with the 3 most important battleground Rust Belt states that will decide this election, as it always does. So New Hampshire will tilt towards Bernie Sanders. New Hampshire loves establishment, moderate type of candidates, similar to Georgia. They don't like the populism. They don't like the, MAGA that Trump brings to the table, which is why he lost it 3 times in a row. Harris managed to win the state by almost 3 percentage points. Glenn Youngkin fits perfectly with the description of New Hampshire. Now, he's not a neocon, obviously, but he's a centrist. And who is their current governor? Kelly Ayotte, who's also a moderate Republican. So I think a candidate like Glenn Youngkin has a decent chance of flipping New Hampshire rather than a MAGA type of candidate. Honestly, Glenn Youngkin has a better chance of winning New Hampshire than Donald Trump, believe it or not. But he's going to fall short. I think Bernie Sanders isn't too bad. I think he'll win this state. Also, New Hampshire in general is just shifting towards the left. It's getting bluer. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a likely Democratic state in 2028. But I think Glenn Youngkin is just too strong, so it'll narrow up the margin, which is why I think if he gets nominated, if he even decides to run, we don't know yet, but I think he will, and I think he should. That would be the smartest move Republicans can make, and that's the point of this video. And as far as the three Rust Belt states go, I know it's unprecedented if they split and break apart, but in this case, I could see that happening and might do that. So Wisconsin goes to Bernie Sanders with its 10 electoral votes. I mean, it kind of makes sense because they voted to the left of the three in 2024 in the last election. Wisconsin was the bluest out of Michigan and Pennsylvania, surprisingly. It's usually the opposite, but in 2024 it voted to the left. So maybe Wisconsin could be a Dem state in 2028. And the one reason why I have it going to Bernie Sanders in this case is because they don't, they're going to have to go with another 4 years of Republican leadership. I think voters would reject that because historically speaking, whoever the current administration is, the previous administration, it would flip. Like if it was a Republican administration, it would go Democrat, and if it was a Democrat, it would go Republican. Obama, Democrat, Trump, Republican, Biden, Democrat, and then again in 2024, it flipped back Republican. So in 2028, I would assume the nation would flip back Democrat, right? Because Republicans just got a trifecta in 2024 and will probably still win the Senate in 2026. I would assume the nation wants a different path of leadership. So Wisconsin, I give it to Bernie. Now, this is when things get interesting. Glenn Youngkin is going to win Michigan and win Pennsylvania. Now, I'm not sure how the Democratic Party is going to react to a Jewish candidate. I believe Bernie Sanders is Jewish, which is why I'm going to give Glenn Youngkin the victory in Michigan. And the reason why I have him winning Pennsylvania is because it was the reddest Rust Belt state of the three. In 2024, Pennsylvania actually voted to the right of Michigan and Wisconsin, so the complete opposite of Wisconsin. And it went to Trump by almost 2 points, actually, 1.8%. And I know he had a lot of things going his way, like the assassination had, significantly boosted turnout, the failed assassination, excuse me. And then you had, obviously, Amish vote come out in favor, which they never vote typically in elections, which is why I can see that it's not going to be as red, Pennsylvania, as it was in 2024. But a candidate like Glenn Youngkin, I think he's just too good. I think he's just unbeatable. That's just my opinion, and I know I sound like I'm overrating him, but I don't know why he's not talked about enough. Now, the question is, will he be able to win a primary? That's the biggest question. Because if he gets past a primary, he's probably going to be unstoppable in the general election. That's just my opinion. So 315 electoral votes. So greater than Donald Trump's margin of, I believe it was 312 in 2024. So expanding the coalition by 3 more electoral votes to Bernie Sanders' 223. Now, if you see my previous videos, I typically have Bernie Sanders doing much, much better. But the reason why is because the candidate he's facing, in this case, Glenn Youngkin, is just too strong, unfortunately. So 223 for Bernie Sanders. So this is the map. Let me know what states you agree with or disagree with in the comment section down below and why. Do you also agree with the main point of this video that it would be extremely smart as a move if Republicans nominated Glenn Youngkin in 2028? I think he is the strongest candidate out of all Republicans. He's basically the Josh Shapiro of, the Republican Party. So one last final reminder is to subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss my content, press the like button, share this video. Don't forget we have memberships. You can find links to that in the description section if you are interested. Thank you everyone for watching.